In the last video, we added the internal elements of each one of our sections, but without paying attention to the positioning. So what we have is just a set of elements displayed according to the normal flow. Let's see how to fix this to position the elements where we want them to be. The first thing we want to do is to display all the divs wrapping each one of the subsections, one next to the other. We have seen two ways of doing this. Do you remember? Right. Inline block or float. I'm going to use float here basically because it's the most common approach when creating layouts. Let's make some simulations using web dev tools. So besides practicing floats, you will get familiar with this very useful tool. So let's open Chrome and web dev tools. Remember Command-Alt-I if you are on Mac and F5 if you are on Windows. Let's see how can we apply the float property and anything else we need to those elements here, the image and the text inside the bio section, in order to display one next to the other. Make sure you are in the Elements tab of the Web Dev Tools in order to see the HTML and the CSS, and with this icon here you can select the div containing the image. In the DOM you will see the corresponding code highlighted. Now we want to add a new CSS rule to test if the float property applied to those two divs inside the bio element place them one next to the other. To do so, we can click the add icon here, and this is going to create a new rule for the div selector. But we want to be more specific than that. We want to add this style only to the div elements that are inside the bio element. So let's add the parent to the selector with the greater than symbol. Let's now add float left and see what happens. This is not exactly what we want, right? The text from the skill sections has been added next to the image instead of the bio text, and the background color has changed. What has happened here? Basically two things. That the parent element from the bio section has collapsed. This is why we see this very little blue element here. Do you remember when this happens? Right, when all the children elements are floated. And this is what we have just done. We have added that float left property to the div elements that are children of bio. And the other thing is that the bio text has a width of 100%. So it doesn't have room to fit next to the image. Let's start by fixing the width of the bio text. Actually, what I'm going to do is to give a width to all the elements inside the bio section. Let's give them a 40% width. That means that they will have a width of 40% of the width of the parent. And this is what happens. The bio text fits, but also the text from the skill section is coming up. And this is happening because as they have a width of 40%, there is still room for other elements to come here and fill the rest of the bio section. And we don't want that. So let's give them a width of a 50%, and this way there is no room for more elements. In the Web Dev Tools, we can disable the rules by unchecking them. And this is what we are going to do from now. So the text is going back to the wrong place, and we are going to leave it like this from now and go fixing the collapsing of the bio section. We saw two ways of doing that. Do you remember them? Right. Using the overflow hidden property or using the clear fix method. We are going to use the overflow property here. Let's add the overflow property to the bio element and set it to hidden, and voila! The bio section is not collapsed anymore. Now it has the height of its content. Let's enable the width property of the elements inside the bio section again, so they have a 50% width of the parent, and now the text is where it has to be, next to the image. Now let's open Visual Studio Code and start applying what we have learned so far to start fixing the layout of our website. Here is Visual Studio Code, and as in this side I have the CSS and in this one the HTML. And remember that you can show and hide the sidebar by pressing Ctrl B if you're on Windows or Command B if you're on Mac. The first thing we want to do is what we have just seen in Web Dev Tools. We want to apply the float left property and the width 50% property to each one of the subsections, and apply the overflow hidden property to the section itself. There are basically two ways we can do that. We can create the selector for each one of the sections and subsections and apply the styles individually to each one of those selectors, or much better, we can make the code reusable by creating a class and then apply that same class, to each one of the elements that need it. And this is what we are going to do. We are going to create our little grid system. This is a way of thinking of our layout as a set of rows and columns that we are going to use to place our content. For example, we can think of each section as a row and then each one of the subsections as columns inside that row. Let's see what I mean. Let's go to the CSS and remove that code that we are not going to use. That one here too. And let's go to the bottom of the page and create here the CSS classes for our layout. In order to make the code tidy and easy to find, let's create here a heading. I'm going to call that layout using a CSS comment. Let's create a class. I'm going to call it row, but you can call it whatever you want, and give it a width of 100% and set the overflow property to hidden. This is going to be the class that we are going to apply to the section element. Then we need to create the classes or the class to apply to each one of the subsections. As we want them to be a 50% width, I'm going to call them call2, but again, you can call that whatever you want, and give them a width of 50%. Let me add the display block property to the row class, so we make sure that every element that has that class will be displayed as a block element. And now back to the call2 class, let's add the float left property, and we are set. Let's now apply the classes to the HTML elements. Row to the bio section, we do it with the class attribute, and then the call2 class to each one of the subsections, to the div elements for each one of the subsections. Now let's open the index.html file in the browser. Remember, open index.html if you want to do it from the console. And here we have it, the layout as we want it. Let's do the same for the rest of the sections now. Let's add the row class to the skill element. Let me place this heading element inside the subsection div. Better. Now let's apply the call2 class to that subsection element, and the same for the other one. And let's do the same with the other section, with the timeline section. Now in the portfolio class, we can add the row class, but here the subsections are different. We have 12 elements and we want each one of those elements to be 1/3 of a row, so that we can have 4 rows with 3 elements each one. So let's create a new class. Let's call it call3 and give it a width of 33.3% and add the float left property. And now that we are here, let's create a couple of additional classes for future use. Let's create one for elements that are going to be a 25% width, and another one for elements that are going to be a 100% width. Let's now add the corresponding classes to the portfolio section, the row class here to the portfolio section itself, and then the call3 class to each one of the items inside the portfolio. Here, as we already have a class, to add an additional one, we use the same class attribute. We don't have to write another one, and place just the name of the class next to the other one with a space in between. And this is it. Let's keep adding the classes to all the items, and we're done. Let's see how it looks. As expected, we have 4 rows with 3 elements each one. Next, we are going to style the layout of the contact section. Here I want to create 2 classes, one being 1/3 wide to place the contact text, and the one containing the form, I want it to be 2/3 wide. So let's create this additional class. I'm going to call it 2/3 and give it a width of 66.6%. Let's apply the styles to the HTML and see how it looks. Oops, can you see this text overflowing the div here? This is because I have missed the row class on the contact section. Let's fix it. And now, this is it. Now it works. Just one more thing. You can see here in the skill sections that the text should be on the right, and we should have another subsection on the left, the one containing the graphic with the the graphical elements with the skills, a graphic that is not yet created, but we want another section here on the left, right? And this is not happening. Let's see why. Let's open Web DevTools, and here we can see that the section that has no content has a height of 0, so the browser is not rendering it. And to fix it, what we are going to do is to add some temporary content. Let's go to Visual Studio Code and just add some text here in each one of the sections that will have a graphical element that is not present now. This is in the timeline section and also in the skills section. Let's now open the browser, and here it is. We will keep building our layout later, but now that we understand how to position elements using floats and position, let's talk about another way of positioning things in our web page, and this is flexboxes. But we are going to see that in another video, so see you there.